So let's start making some changes to this material definition. First thing I want to do is change the name, since we're still using MicroStation's original material name. So let's do a rename. We're going to be asked if we want to keep this material assignment, because remember we have made an assignment on the shade itself, so we'll just say yes to that. And now we can change the name. I'm going to call this shade. And it's dark blue, so I really should save this at this point. So let's click on the save. And I'm saving it in my Module 15 folder, and it's going to be called the Table Pal, which is what we're working in. So I'm going to save that. Want to replace it? Yes, of course. Now it's gone to black, which means it's nicely saved. And our save icon is grey. So let's look at what we've got here. First of all, let's look at the material itself. So right now we have a pattern map that's automatically applied here from the default definition. And it's on, as you would expect. Let's just click on the main icon here and open up the settings for the actual fabric itself. Now we are working with an image, and the image is this Fabric 09 JPEG. You can click on the magnifying glass icon here, which will open up everything that's available to us. And if you can't see these as thumbnails like this, then simply click on the display icon and select either medium or large icons. And you can now scroll through the entire list of materials. I'm going to cancel that. Next thing is the units. Now right now by default we're in meters, but I'm working in English units, so I'm going to change that to master units, which makes a little more sense. And now we have to think about the size of this pattern in terms of X and Y, aspect ratio and size. Now I'm going to lock this because I want them both the same. And here is where we start to experiment. Now I'm going to enter a value of 0.5 here. And I'm going to do a very quick check with a render. I still have my original fence in place. Not too bad, and in fact if I increase the light a little bit, that's not too bad at all things considered. So I think I'll stick with that particular value. Now I'm going to get rid of that, okay, because I'm going to keep doing this quite frequently. So that's probably about the right value. Notice that you can have an offset of the pattern, in other words you move it in one direction or another, not normally used. We can flip the pattern, we can mirror it, but we do want to repeat it, otherwise we'll probably just see a single rectangle of material rather than the whole shade in the material. Don't worry about the gamma, anti-aliasing don't worry about. Mapping is a little important because this is how the material is draped, if you wish, over the surface. Now it would make a little more sense, I think, for us to pick cylindrical, since we're dealing with a cylindrical type of shade. Now do keep your eye on the preview. Now some of you, if you're working with a fairly slow computer, you'll find that the luxology setting is relatively slow to regenerate. You can change it to smooth, but you won't see quite the same thing. So ideally, leave it in luxology. It does display a little better. So I'm going to leave it as that. Get rid of that. Now let's look at the actual settings that we have for the material itself. Now efficiency is a combination of several different things. And specifically, they are diffuse, the translucency, the specular, and the opacity of the material. Now, some of those are on this tab, some of them are on the transparency tab. Ideally, efficiency should be no more than 100%. You can, however, have more than 100 if you're trying to create a special effect, but typically you try to keep it under 100. Now, color is related to the pattern over here. And right now we have a 100 value, and in fact no color at all. At 100, the pattern is totally predominant. However, if we set a color and we bring this slider backwards, then we start to see more and more color and less pattern. Now we're going to experiment with this a little bit. I'm going to put that at about 85 or so. I'm going to change the color. I'm going to add a little more blue to this, I think, and we'll see how this works out. Diffuse I'll leave at 50, and that's the overall light that's being reflected, basically. This shade does cast shadow, so that's just fine. Specular, I'm going to change a little bit. This is a material, so there's really no specular value, but I'm going to put one there anyway. Does not reflect, plain material. and everything else is fine. We have nothing on the transparency tab other than opacity, which right now is at 100%, meaning that no light is being transmitted through the material. It's opaque, in other words. If I pull this back a bit, then we'd start to see light shining through the material, which I don't really want because look what's happened to the efficiency. It's gone above 100. Let's drop that back to 100 so it's fully opaque. Back to the General tab. Let's try another render. Not too bad. Let's up the light values a little bit. That's not too bad at all. Okay, I'll keep that for the moment. So let me get rid of that for the second. Now I'm going to go to the surface option here, which is really a bump map. As you can see, it says bump, which adds texture to the surface. So I need to turn it on first. So we'll go across here and turn on, but we're going to link to the pattern. It makes sense for the bump to use the same JPEG graphics file as the actual material itself. So we'll turn that on, and now it's active. I'm going to change this to, say, 1.5. Now, technically that's millimeters, which is really quite small. So we'll leave it where it is, and let's do another render and see if it's any different. Let's up the light values a little bit. There's a slight bump effect, but not very much. Let me get rid of that. Let's up the bump value a little bit more. Let's go to, say, 3 and do another render. And up the color again. Yeah, now we're seeing a little more definition. If you look down here, the seam, you'll see that we seem to have the material standing up a little bit. That's what the bump does. Okay, so far so good. And let's just experiment a little bit with the color value here. So I'm going to pull this back a bit to say about 29. Let's try that. And let's now try a render to see what we get. Okay, now you see what's happening here. We're losing the pattern. We can still see the bump, but we're losing the pattern effect, and the fact the material detail has disappeared because we're overlaying with this more and more color, less and less pattern. So that's really not a good option as far as we're concerned right now. So that one could definitely go. We'll probably be using that one in terms of our final rendering. So I'm going to get rid of this. I am going to bring this back to where we were. But let's double check. It's always good to do a very quick render to see just what you've got. Yes, I think that's just about right. There we go. So we now have a little bit of the extra color, but we still see most of the material. That will do fine. So now I can go back and delete all of the previous ones that we did, which I didn't want. And it's good to actually keep up with deletions. Otherwise you finish up with dozens and dozens of slightly different renders. So I would strongly suggest that you experiment with all of the settings here, not just the ones I've looked at, but just simply play and keep checking with the render to see what the differences are. But come back to this basic idea that we have here. Notice that this has gone blue again, so I need to save it again. Now it's saved, so we're locked in this case. So practice, and then we'll move on to the next material.